seconds, so don't feel like you missed anything yet. Good evening, everyone. We're allowing people to enter the program. Just be patient while we get started. We're allowing people to join. We'll get started shortly. It might be an appropriate time to mention the fact that Andy Leach is with us. He will be moderating tonight's discussion, and he comes to us from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And in case you're unaware, they have big doings coming up at the end of October. We were just discussing the inductees of the upcoming award winners, and the likes of Paul McCartney and who else? Taylor Swift and several others are coming to Cleveland, Ohio at the last week of October.
Yeah, that's right. We just announced today a lot of the presenters who will be here on October 30th, as Gwen said, to induct all of our new class into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So yeah, it's a great new class, very diverse, very strong on women as well. And yeah, as we announced today that Paul McCartney will be here, Taylor Swift will be here, Jennifer Hudson, Drew Barrymore will be here to induct the Go-Go's. So yeah, lots of great things happening all next week.
So if you're at all interested in music, I would strongly recommend you look at the Rock Hall's upcoming events, especially if you're in the area. Many people don't realize Ohioans are able to get in for free on one day of the festivities. I don't recall which.
Let me think. I guess it's probably Celebration Day, which is the one coming up. But all Cleveland residents can get in free anytime.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, it looks like we have the majority of people with us this evening. Thank you for attending. This is the Hudson Library and Historical Society. I'm Gwen Mayer, the archivist. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to share with you this evening that we have Andy Leach from the Rock Hall of Fame, and he is going to interview and moderate a discussion with Robby Krieger. And most of you probably grew up listening to Robby's music. I know I certainly did. In case you are unaware, he is the major guitar from the Doors, and he has a lot to tell us about his life and experience with the Doors. And I'm going to turn the discussion over to Andy and Robby.
All right. Well, thanks, Gwen. Robby, thanks for doing this tonight, and it's an honor to be here to talk with you. So we're here to talk about your great new book, Set the Night on Fire, Living, Dying, and Playing Guitar with the Doors, which I really enjoyed reading. So let's dig right into it. Can you talk about what led you to write the book and kind of, when you first decided to do it?
Well, John Densmore was the first one of us to write a book. And that was back in, gosh, I think the 70s. And then Ray wrote his book. And after that happened, the two of them kind of, weren't too nice to each other in their books, and started causing problems with the three of us. And so I was thinking about writing one, but I said, well, I'll just wait till all this crapola dies down, So basically it took this long. And but I actually started back then about 25 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but never, I just didn't finish it, didn't have the desire to make more trouble, So I'll just wait till things die down. And then finally, when the pandemic hit, I had some time on my hands, and I said, okay, I'm going to finish this thing.
Right. Well, we're glad you did. At one point in the book, you mentioned as you look back over your life, you don't see it all in sequence or chronologically, but rather kind of in terms of moments or sensations. And as I read the book, I felt like it really reflects that, because as you're reading it, you can still follow the general arc of your life and the story of the Doors, of course, because you keep coming back to it. But all of that's kind of interspersed with these snapshots from and moments from other parts of your life, and you kind of jump around a bit. But it's a great way of doing it. I really enjoyed it. Did you know when you first started on the book that you would want to arrange it that way?
Well, I didn't really plan it. I didn't have that in mind when I started, but once I got a writing partner who really helped me a lot. His name is Jeff Alulis, and he, we started talking about it, and I'd watched some movies lately where they did that. There'd be flashbacks, and it kind of makes it more interesting to me anyway. I mean, that's not going to work on every book or movie, but I kind of like it when they do that, And,
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of cool, and it's not, when you do it chronologically, I think it's more kind of boring.
Sure. Well, in the way you do it, it sort of reminds me of how we recall memories and it reminds me of a conversation even. You can tell a story, but you kind of go off in different directions but you come back to the story. It's really a great way of doing it, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of fun.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to talk about the Doors a bit, of course, which is a big part of the story. And one thing is that kind of was a bit of a surprise at the beginning when you kind of get together with them. You write in the book that Jim Morrison didn't make much of an impression on you at first, at least. Ray and John kind of saw something in him maybe that you didn't right away. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I'd read some of his lyrics before I met him, and that was pretty cool. I said, oh, this guy's really different. But when I met him the first time, John brought him over to my house, and he just seemed to be like a normal kind of college guy, and nothing crazy or out of the norm. But as time went on, I found out, got to know him a little better, and he did turn out to be a little bit different than your normal person. But when he was just sitting around hanging out and having fun, he was just one of the coolest guys you'd ever want to meet.
Mm.
And at that point in his life, this was before he started drinking bad. He was just a really great guy,
Yeah.
especially to write songs with,
Yeah. Can you talk about that? I know you started, I think maybe one of the earliest collaborations you did with him was on The End. And I think that's when you kind of saw it and what they were seeing, and kind of, his lyrics really, really hit you. Can you talk about collaborating with him on songwriting?
Well, at one point I was still living at home with my parents, and they decided to go to Europe for 3 weeks or something. And so I had Jim come and stay at my house during that time. And so we started writing stuff, and it was just like magic, man. It was, I've written songs with many different people afterwards, and it just wasn't the same,
Yeah.
I mean, the end just started out to be a simple love song. This is the end, beautiful friend, and but then as we played it live every night, or mostly every night, he would add stuff to it. It would get longer and longer, and then the instrumental stuff would get longer, and that's how a lot of our songs kind of grew as we played them. Light My Fire was a similar thing.
Right. And it sounds like he always welcomed not just your input, but everyone's input on the songs, right?
Yeah, he was very open to everybody's opinion.
Mhm.
And but during that time, Jim and I, we wrote a bunch of songs together, and and then of course we took them to the other guys and they would put their 2 cents in as well.
Mhm.
And Jim didn't play an instrument. He had no musical knowledge, hardly at all. So that was kind of our job to fill in the blanks and make it musically interesting.
Right.
And John and Ray and I had such different backgrounds musically that made for a really cool musical palette. If you know what I mean.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. There was no other band that sounds like the Doors or that kind of grooved like the Doors, and I definitely want to get into that. One more thing about Jim though, can you talk about him just as a performer, like as a live performer?
Well, at first, he wasn't much of a performer. We played around Hollywood quite a bit before we got to the whiskey, which is where we really kind of broke through. But he would, we would rehearse and we would all be facing each other like in a room. So that's kind of what he was used to. And then, so once he got up on stage, he would just turn around and face the band and hardly even acknowledge the audience.
Hmm.
But as time went on, he definitely started getting better at that. And by the time we hit the whiskey, he was in full blown, lead singer mode.
Right. And one interesting thing you point out about that is that Ray, who's kind of a natural showman as well, kind of instinctively backed off when Jim grew into that role, right?
Right, yeah, because Ray was, he was quite the performer before the Doors. His brother Rick had a band called Rick and the Ravens, and Ray was he was kind of the front man for that. He played the keys, but he also sang, and he was a pretty good singer, blues shouter kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
But then, as Jim started getting to be more of a vocalist, Ray would back off and let Jim have the spotlight.
Right.
Which was pretty cool. I mean, it took a guy of his. See, he was a little older than us. He was like 27. I was 19. Jim was 21 or 2, and John, I think, was a little younger than Jim. So, Ray, he was definitely mature enough to know when to back off and not complain about it.
Right. There's a great discussion in the book about how kind of his left-hand bass lines were one of the things that kind of became such a defining element of the Doors sound. Can you talk about how that fit in and how you kind of built everything else around that?
Well, it's true. He, at first we never had a bass player except for in the studio, but Ray had this, from growing up with classical lessons and stuff, he really had a great left hand thing going, and the cool thing about it was he would just kind of put it on automatic pilot, and so it became the bass became a very kind of I guess you call it not boring, but hypnotic.
Yeah.
And that kind of is what made the Doors hypnotic sounding, and that I think it definitely had an effect on the listener. And so a lot of times when we would record the stuff in the studio, the bass player would just copy exactly what Ray played.
Right.
And sometimes not, but a lot of times they would. And that was pretty cool.
Yeah. I think you called his playing otherworldly in the book, and I think that's the perfect way of saying that especially about the left hand. Yeah.
Yeah, if you've ever seen the the Hollywood Bowl footage.
Yeah.
It starts out, the whole concert starts out with Ray doing music's over. So it's just Ray, and he's just going dun, 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 with his left hand, and the right hand would go. And I think John must have got hypnotized or something, because he was supposed to come in with the drums pretty soon, and he just let it keep going and going, and almost point of ridiculous. And then Jim was ready to, leap onto the stage, and he was getting cramps back there, man. He was like waiting. But Ray, the way he played that, his time was so good that I think that was a big thing with the Doors, is the time was always perfect, and not especially because of John, but of Ray. I mean, Ray, and that let John kind of be loose on the drums. He could do a lot of stuff that a normal drummer wouldn't do.
Right. Yeah, exactly. He's kind of floating on top, and then you're also up there kind of floating on top of it all. It's really, there's just nothing quite like the sound of that band. Yeah. Well, can we talk about John's playing too? I think you mentioned at one point in the book that really no one can play those songs like he can.
Yeah, for sure. I've played Doors songs with so many different, musicians and drummers.
Hmm.
And it's just amazing how none of them really get how John played. It's hard to explain, but it's like nothing like your normal drummer would play. He just has this way of floating over the top of everything, and he plays off the vocal. That's what he does.
Right.
He's like answering the vocal, and that was very unusual in those days, and even in these days.
Yeah, I know. I mean, he had this, you talk about it in the book too, but he had this musical dialogue with the lyrics, even in a way that is really interesting. Just, I know in one of his books, he talks about how he got that from Elvin Jones and Coltrane and the way they would kind of interact on stage. Does that sound right to you?
That sounds right. Yeah. In fact, we got to see them a few times.
Yeah.
And, we really were big fans of Coltrane. In fact, in Light My Fire, the solo part is kind of based on Coltrane's My Favorite Things. It's the same similar chords. It's a different time signature, but the way they play off each other is kind of how Ray and I were trying to do.
Yeah, interesting. Well, let's talk about your contributions to the band too, and your guitar style in particular. And I mean, I know early on you kind of talk about how you were maybe trying to incorporate other people's playing into your style, and quickly you sort of assembled your own entirely unique style that's unlike anyone else. Can you talk about where those influences come from, kind of what you were drawing from in those days?
Yeah, well, the first type of guitar style I was trying to do was flamenco.
Mhm.
So when I first got my first guitar when I was like 15, I got this Mexican flamenco guitar. It was really a good one, even though it was a Mexican one. Yeah. So I took flamenco lessons with my buddy Billy Wolf, who is kind of really my guitar teacher in the beginning, because he knew a little bit more than I did, so he showed me the chords and stuff. But so we took flamenco lessons together, and we imagined that we'd be playing in some Spanish town one day playing flamenco, and then I got into folk music quite a bit. I was a big Bob Dylan fan, and there was some guys from back east who were, Greenwich Village folk time back in the early 60s. Dave Van Ronk and the Jim Queskin Jug Band.
Uh-huh.
There's some guys named Kerner, Ray, and Glover who really were my favorite. There were 2 guitar players and a harmonica player, and they really kind of defined what I wanted to play on the guitar when I was learning. So I really had no idea about playing rock and roll or steel string guitar at all, because I was like folky, hippie, flamenco kind of guy. And then until one day I went and saw Chuck Berry play.
Yeah.
And I really didn't go to see Chuck Berry play because it was a blues festival. And they had Big Mama Thornton, you know who she was?
Sure.
She played, she did Hound Dog, before Elvis. And they had the Chambers Brothers.
Yeah.
Chambers Brothers were actually a blues band before they were a rock band. And so this was a cool kind of blues festival. And then comes Chuck Berry. And man, that night he was just so good. It was, I'd never seen him before, but I'd seen him plenty of times after, and he was terrible because he just picked up bands wherever he went. Yeah, but this was his real band. Johnny Johnson, the piano player.
Yep.
And he had this bass player who played with just his left hand. And it was crazy. Anyway, so he blew my mind that night. He really did. And the next day I went and got an electric guitar. It was red, just like his, but it wasn't the same model because that was too expensive. So I settled for the cheap SG, which I ended up using on the first 2 albums before it got stolen.
Right. Yeah, you wrote Light My Fire with that guitar, right? And
Yeah,
did it on a couple albums, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember in the book you talked about that guitar and how you never found it again, of course. But I think at the end of the book you talk about how you're not that worried about it because the object is less important than what it inspired, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But you know what? Just recently, we got, from doing this book, my buddy Jeff Alulis, who's my co-writer, he found the serial number for that guitar somehow. It was on a manifest from Europe.
Oh.
It was so now we got the serial number, and we're going to put it out there and maybe see what happens.
Cool.
I talked to the guys from Gibson. We're gonna make a little video about it and stuff.
Right, and it's an SG special, right? A red one.
Right, it's got the black pickups.
Mm-hmm.
It's cheap. It was $180, but it was my first guitar, and it sounded pretty damn good.
Yeah, I'd say so.
It didn't have the humbuckers like the later ones, but maybe in a way it was better for what I needed.
Yeah.
You know what? I just got a signal on this phone that the battery is running low. Can I take 1 minute to get a charger?
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Hang on, guys.
Gwen, maybe this is a good time to talk about the books for sale.
It is. Let me unmute myself and bring myself back on video. They are available at the Learned Owl here in Hudson, Ohio. Set the Night on Fire is the title of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can walk in and ask Kate or any of the employees at the Learned Owl for the book, and they'll be happy to sell them. I believe there are some signed as well. I could be wrong there, but I think so. And for upcoming programs, it's another moment for me to put in another commercial here. Tomorrow night, we're hosting the novelist James Patterson. So if you're at all interested in reading James Patterson or have read him and enjoy him, he will be with us at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. So please go online and sign up much the way you did for this program. And remember that the Rock Hall has an upcoming programs, period, in the induction at the end of the month. And we do have a couple of quick questions we can ask Robby when he comes back. We encourage you all to put your questions in the question and answer box, and we'll try and read them and get him to answer them all. I'm sure that Andy has numerous questions of his own, but we want to make sure that we get yours answered as well. I think Robby's joining us, coming back to us. Maybe?
Go up from the side, so it's a better picture.
Oh, is that okay to have it on the side?
Oh,
That's good.
Even better, actually. It's great.
Okay.
Are all plugged in?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah. So you're plugged in. We plugged the books. I think we're all in alignment. So let's see. We were talking about. Well, you mentioned the SG special, and we talked about you wrote "Light My Fire" with that guitar. There's a lot of things, a lot of examples of this in the book, but of seemingly kind of small things that happened that turned out to be massively important. And one of them is just coming up with those 3 words, "Light My Fire," and it comes, the legacy of that song is huge. Obviously, it kind of was released into the world and became its own thing. Can you talk about sort of how that song came about and kind of what it now means to you?
Well, at first Jim was writing all the songs, that was his thing. And, when he wrote those first songs, like maybe 10 songs, he actually didn't write them. He just heard them. So weird thing, but it just, he says he was up on this rooftop where he was kind of living at the time. And he would smoke this Acapulco Gold, I think it was. And all of a sudden he would hear a concert in his head. It was like, it was all there, so he would quick write down the words at least. And he would try to remember the melodies. And, that's when you see in the movie, he's walking down the beach and Ray's sitting there and he goes, "Hey, what have you been doing?" "Oh, writing my songs." And so he sang one for him, and it was Moonlight Drive. So, anyway, so he was writing all the songs. And at one point we said, or he said, "Hey, you know what? We don't have enough original songs. We're going to need a lot more. Why don't you guys try and write some, So I said, "Okay, well, what should I write about?" And he says, something universal, something that won't go out of style too soon, So I said, "Okay, what would be like that?" I said, "Okay." And then I had the idea, earth, air, fire, and water, 4 elements. And so I picked fire because I'd always liked that song by the Stones, "Play with Fire."
Mm-hmm.
And I really like that song. So I'll write about fire. And then, so I got, the music down pretty much that I said, "Okay, now how am I going to write about fire?" And somehow the 3 words just popped into my head: "Light my fire." And, up to as far as I know, nobody had ever said those 3 words like that, put them together like that. And so I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. And kind of the song, I think, is the Doors' biggest hit, right?
Well, it's had the most impact on the band. I think "Hello, I Love You" might have sold a few more,
Okay.
few more singles, but it was definitely, I think it was the one that was on the top 10 the longest. And then of course, Jose Feliciano did a version, and his was quite different than ours. He didn't use the intro, the Bach intro that Ray was so famous for, and it was a lot more kind of it was maybe more easy listening kind of thing, like you would hear here in an elevator or something.
Right.
Not to put it down.
Yeah.
I really like that song now. At first I didn't like it much, but I grew to love it because the way he plays the guitar on it is so cool.
Yeah.
And the fact that after he did it, then everybody started doing it. It was like so many different types of bands and artists. It became a standard basically, and it was really because of him, because he did it in such a commercial kind of way. It was good for, like, Woody Herman did it, Minnie Riperton, Stevie Wonder did it. All these jazz artists covered it. So it really became a standard, and that one song I think is worth than all of our catalog combined.
Right. I remember you reflect on it at one point and talk about how it's interesting to think that if Break On Through hadn't, if Break On Through had done better as a single, you may not have even put out Light My Fire as a single, right?
Right, because it was too long. That was the problem. I mean, we knew Light My Fire was a hit because when we played it, like at the Whiskey and stuff, people would just go nuts every time, so we knew that was our strongest song. And but once we kind of played it a lot, we started stretching those solos out, and that became 7 minutes long. And at that time, the radio wouldn't play any more than 3.5 minutes. So we said, all right, let's put out one of the other songs. Now I have no idea why we picked Break On Through, because I think Backdoor Man or Crystal Ship or Whiskey Bar, all of those could have been hits, So anyway, Break On Through kind of it didn't do that well. It cracked the top 40, but that's about it.
Right.
And so by then we decided, okay, everybody says we should cut out the instrumental part. It'll be boring for us, but maybe it'll get on the radio, and it did.
Well, speaking of that, this is kind of funny. Just today, I was on the phone with Chris Hillman of the Byrds and the Flying Burrito Brothers. This doesn't happen to me every day, but it happened today, and for a couple of minutes. And he told me that he was just listening to the radio recently, and Light My Fire came on, and he was blown away by what a great song, what a great record, and what a great performance it is by all of you. So he wanted me to pass along kudos to you for that record.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, he's driving right now on tour, so just in his car listening to the radio. He was blown away by that song, so he wanted me to tell you that. So
that's very cool.
Yeah. Well, there are some interesting surprises in the book that just small ones that I wouldn't have maybe thought of. There was one cool story that you told about how you sat next to Jimi Hendrix on a flight, sadly only about 3 weeks before he died. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we were going to the festival in England, the Isle of Wight festival, which they made a film of it, and I think we really did a great musically a great set. Jim was kind of he wasn't in the mood to be very theatric that night for some reason. Well, I know why. It's because he had that Miami trial looming over his head right the next week or so.
Right.
So, in fact, he told the guys who were filming, he says, "Man, turn the lights down, man. Turn them way down. I want it to be just, And they hated that idea, because film guys want to show whatever's happening. And Jim kept telling him, "Turn the lights down, turn the lights." And he did the same thing at the Hollywood Bowl, where we were filming that night. And that's the only time we ever actually, filmed one of our appearances ourselves. You know, we paid all this for all the cameras and the lights and all this stuff. And Jim kept saying, "Turn the lights down." And then Ray would say, "Jim, we're filming, remember?" And Jim was kind of on acid that night, so he kept forgetting. Anyway, so I got to talk to Jimmy for 7 hours or so, and unfortunately, I was too cool at the time to really ask what I really wanted to talk to him about. Like, how do you do that? But it was fun just sitting and hanging with him.
Yeah. Another thing that was a surprise to me that I just hadn't thought of was that I never made the connection before, was you kind of laid out how James Brown influenced so much of the Doors music. And it makes sense when you start kind of seeing the examples. Can you just think of any one of those you could talk about?
Yeah, I mean, we all love James Brown, and we all of us happened to go to this Saturday night film thing that they had in LA at the time, and they were showing the Tammy Show. Have you ever seen the Tammy Show?
Yeah, it's great.
Well, the James Brown set on that thing was just amazing. I mean, that really got to all of us, I would say. And it was so funny because right after James Brown, the Stones went on, and I never realized it, but Mick got a lot of his footwork from James Brown. So here he is trying to copy James Brown after the real thing comes on, and it was pretty funny. But James Brown had this horn section, and the way he arranged the stuff, it was really quite impactful on how I wrote songs or arranged them. And there's a couple songs that I used James Brown, even Soul Kitchen. If you listen close, the guitar part is kind of like a horn part, really. And there's quite a few other songs, and I talk about them in the book.
Yep. Before we move over to maybe take some questions from our viewers, I wanted to talk about one other thing I kind of really thought was fascinating in the book, and that's this discussion about kind of the idea of fact versus myth in the Doors story over the years, and how you kind of have to untangle, you and John especially have had to untangle kind of reality from some of those myths that have persisted, some of which maybe came out of the movie, and maybe some which came out of some of the books or whatever that have come out. And you kind of seem to have a love-hate relationship with the myths, right? Because you've had to do that, but it's because of the myths that maybe that the Doors story has kind of resonated with some people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. The first book that came out was Danny Sugarman and Jerry Hopkins. And so actually first Jerry Hopkins wrote this book, No One Here Gets Out Alive. And nobody bought it. I don't even know if it was out yet. Maybe they didn't even release it. And then Danny got a hold of it and said, "Hey, let me help you out here, man. I knew Jim and all this stuff." And he didn't really know Jim. This was a kid who was like 13 years old, and he'd hang around the office and do our family sometimes. So in his mind, Danny's mind, Jim was like this certain thing. And so Danny would pretend that he was saying Jim's words, what Jim would think in his mind. And it just wasn't right. It was like, it's kind of a fabrication. And then and then Ray got a hold of it too, and he kind of put his 2 cents in there and blew it even more out of proportion. So, and that book was really kind of what the movie was based on. So
Right.
it was, you know, a little all overblown. Yeah, a lot of the stuff was true, but a lot of it wasn't. So in my book, I try to weed out the stuff that's that was really true, and what was maybe a little overblown.
Yeah, it definitely does that, and it's great to have some of those myths debunked a little bit. So Gwen is here, and I think she's going to read some questions from the audience.
Robby, Mike wants to know about Light My Fire and Yes, the River Knows were inspired by 2 elements. Have you written air and earth songs?
No, I only got as far as fire and water. But that's a good idea, though. I'm going to start. It's never too late.
Diane says she likes your somewhat unique style of using your fingernails instead of a pick when strumming and picking. Can you comment on how that style influenced your music?
Well, you know, I learned to do that playing flamenco, because they have you use your fingernails on the right hand, and gosh, even today I'm constantly taking care of my nails and make sure they don't get broken, and it's not easy. But you know, I kind of naturally just took that style into the electric guitar with the Doors, and I think it worked out good because it made me sound different than a lot of these guys. But then I read this article by Wes Montgomery, who also used his didn't use a pick, and they said, if you had it to do all over again, would you have learned to use a pick? He said, hell yes. He said, I definitely would have. So at that point, I started learning to use the pick. That was kind of after the Doors were over. So now I do like half and half.
Someone asked if being a musical legend weighs deeply on you.
Well, gosh, I mean, it's a good problem to have. Let me put it that way.
Catherine wants to know if the music industry encouraged substance abuse back in the day, and how many options were there for recovery, psychological support? Do you think things would have been different if the Doors started now as opposed to back then? You know, what do you think about the ultimate positives of creating a creative spirit around Jim?
Well, yeah, back in those days, there were no rehabs or Betty Ford clinics or anything like that, and which was a bummer, because I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying Jim would have been cured by it, but at least it would have had a chance. You know? In fact, matter of fact, we did do kind of an intervention on Jim, which I talk about in the book. My dad was into psychiatry. He went to see a shrink every week for his whole life, and which was kind of unusual back then. So one day we corralled Jim and brought him over to my house, and my dad talked to him about, you know, because he knew he had a drinking problem at that point, and he actually agreed to go see a shrink. You know, it only lasted a couple of weeks, but we did try, and yeah, I think if it was today, there would have been a lot better chance. Although, I mean, we've lost so many great artists, even in the last 10 years, to substance abuse. So, you know, Jim was not a guy that easily was, you know, to deal with as far as talking about getting rid of addictions. he probably would have been the hardest pupil of any AA program ever.
John wants to know about Light My Fire being longer on the album than the radio version, which was only 3 minutes long, as he recalls. What's the story about the decision to make a short version versus a long version?
Well, like I said before, you know, it was hard to get a song on the radio as any more than 3.5 minutes. And, you know, at that time, FM radio was just starting, just barely starting. So there was a guy named Dave Diamond, and he had a station out in the valley, FM, and he used to tell us that, hey man, every time I play Light My Fire, the phones just light up. So it's like nothing I've ever seen, you know. Says you guys should really shorten it down and get it on the AM radio. And this was a guy who, you know, he was an FM guy. And so we finally listened to him. I think he was a real one of the real reasons that we actually cut it down. And you know, the minute we cut it down, it got on AM radio all over the country, and it was a giant hit.
Someone else would like to know about your interest in Indian music.
Well, back in the early 60s, I really got into Indian music. Some of my friends were listening to it. And, you know, Ravi Shankar had just started to come to the States and play. And I used to listen to Indian music every night before I would go to bed as I was going to sleep, you know. I'm not saying it put me to sleep, but it was just, see, they have evening ragas and then they have morning ragas. So I would put on the evening raga. And John Densmore and I actually took lessons from the Ravi Shankar school in Hollywood. It's called the Kinara School. That was pretty cool. We got to meet Robbie.
Kurt wants to know, was there ever a best audience or a best concert that you played to?
Oh God, there were so many good ones, but I think the first couple times we went to San Francisco and played the Fillmore, that was some of the coolest audiences I've ever played to, I think. They were so into the music. They were, you know, it wasn't a bunch of teeny boppers just out to have some fun, you know. It was real. These people really knew their music.
Who did you share the bill with at the Fillmore? Can you think of any of those?
The first time it was the Rascals, Young Rascals. Country Joe and the Fish. We played with the Dead. We played with the Airplane. A lot of those San Francisco groups. So that was really fun too, getting to play with those guys.
Cool.
And we met Janis Joplin. I have a whole part in the book about Janis.
Yep.
MC wants to have you discuss very briefly Love Her Madly.
Okay, well, Love Her Madly, I wrote about my girlfriend, Lynn, who later became my wife and still is after 50 years. And it was all about, don't you love her as she's walking out the door? And when we would have a fight or something, she would walk out the door and slam the shit out of that door. So the whole house would shake, you know. So that's kind of what inspired that song.
John wants to know, in the Oliver Stone movie, which we know has flaws, there was a scene that took place at Andy Warhol's factory. Did that really happen?
You know, I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, I wasn't there. You know, I'm probably, Jim was there and Pam and it was that gal that he was. Oh gosh.
Mike wants to know if you have any strong memories of playing here in Cleveland.
Oh yeah, Cleveland was one of our favorite places to play. The first show we did there, it was, I forget the name of the place, but it was a pretty good sized auditorium. And it was so weird because the audience just didn't seem to understand what we were doing for the first part of the show. And they kind of got warmed up a little bit. And at the end of the show, we did Light My Fire. No applause, very, very little applause. So we left the stage, and then finally they started clapping and stamping their feet and stuff like that. So we went back out and we did the end as an encore, and then we left the stage, no applause. And then a few minutes later, we started hearing this noise, and it got louder and louder. And man, they just destroyed that place. I don't know if they were mad or if they wanted us to come back or what, but they broke all the chairs in the whole auditorium. It was like firewood. Crazy.
Robby, you've disappeared from us, but I think you can still hear me.
Yes, I can.
When writing songs, do you have a feeling that a certain song would turn out to be iconic? Did you know at the time that these songs would be so life-changing for generations?
Really had no idea. You know, I hope so, but I mean, you know, Light My Fire, I knew was going to be big. It had potential because when we play it, like at the Whiskey, the people would go nuts. You know, that was like the biggest, you know, biggest reaction we got from any song, any of our songs. So we had, you know, we knew that was going to do something. At least we hope so.
Catherine wants to know about what you remember about recording Spanish Caravan. She loves it. It's a cool jam.
Good. Well, you know, like I said, I played flamenco, and it was hard to get any flamenco into a Doors song, really. But I finally figured out, you know, had an idea. I kind of stole this lick, da 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 da, which is it's that I learned in playing classical music, you know, on the guitar, and then I made up my own part after that, which was you know, the carry me caravan took me away, and so it was kind of a combination between those two things. You know, I don't know why I should have done more of those type of songs with the Doors, but it was just so different. It was like, okay, we'll do that, but you can't do that on every album.
Was there any one person that you ever really wanted to play with that you never got to play with?
Yes, I really wanted to play with Bob Dylan. You know, back in the day, I mean, he was really my idol for a while. I even had a harmonica holder. You know, I would do the Bob Dylan songs, and when I was in college, and I just thought, you know, when I heard Michael Bloomfield playing on his first Electric album, I said, wow, I could do that. You know, that's my bag right there. But I never had the nerve to ask Bob, even when I met him at the Hall of Fame one time. Didn't really ask him.
What do you listen to today, Robby?
Well, believe it or not, I still listen to Indian music. I've got that whole thing in my car, and I listen to jazz, quite a bit of jazz and R&B. You know, Aretha Franklin, stuff like that. And there's one band I like today, Greta Van Fleet. They're pretty cool.
Yep.
Yeah. They love the Doors. I met them, and they told me how much we influenced them and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, we're delighted that you took this time to be with us this evening. Thank you so much. Thank you for finally setting the record straight about so many of these stories that might get twisted a little for future generations. Thank you for your wonderful songs that have meant so much to many of us in multiple generations.
Well, thanks so much to you. And we had a great time at the Hall of Fame when we got inducted.
Well, we hope you'll come back.
Yeah.
Oh, wouldn't mind. Wouldn't mind.
Yeah, come to Cleveland anytime. And yeah, Robbie, this was really enjoyable for me. So I'm also honored you joined us tonight. And congrats on the book. And everyone out there should buy a copy. I highly recommend it.
By all
Well,
means, I agree.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you all so much for joining us this evening, and we wish you well. And remember, tomorrow evening is the author James Patterson, if you care to join us. Andy, thank you as well. I know you're very busy right now and you took the time to do this, so we really appreciate that as well.
Yeah, thanks,
You
Andy.
both are champions of libraries.
That's right. I'm honored to do it. So thanks, Gwen, for inviting me.
Hey, Robbie, did you ever play in a library? Did you
no,
ever play in a library?
You're not supposed to. You're supposed to be quiet in a library.
Not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame library.
I would do it. I would do it. You know.
Well, you're
Yeah,
welcome here anytime at the Hudson Library. We'll let you play here.
All right. I'll keep that in mind. Is that near the Hall of Fame?
It is. We're about just a half hour out.
Okay. Cool.
So
All
thank
right.
you both. Thank you
Thank
all
you.
for joining us. We wish
Thanks,
you a
Gwen.
good evening. Bye-bye
Thanks,
now.
Gwen.